English translation 921st Contact Tuesday, the 18th of November 2025, 8:11 hours.
There you are again. Greetings and welcome. Unfortunately, none of you answered my call. What was the reason for you all remaining silent? I was concerned about this, and of course, could find no explanation as to why neither you nor Anjana nor Florina responded to me.
Unfortunately, that was not possible for us, because we were no longer given the opportunity to do so. When I was on my way back to the station after our last conversation, I was, how would you say, intercepted by one of our large transport beam ships and taken to Aero. Florina and Anjana were also there, and had been picked up before me, because it was very urgent.
Yes, but why I do not understand. Surely there must have been a good reason for this, because I cannot imagine that something...
But that is how it is, and it was also necessary because beings from outside our Federation invaded our territory. However, this required lengthy negotiations. However, everything took a long time and was associated with unpleasant and tiring negotiations with the intruders. And because Florina, Anjana, and I are trained and qualified for such eventualities, we were immediately summoned to conduct the unavoidable negotiations.
And was everything resolved satisfactorily? And, if I may ask, as you say, the three of you are predestined to verify and regulate such occurrences, which leads me to ask whether this has ever happened before.
Yes, it has, several times during the last 7,800 years, because evolution is also progressing in our ANKAR universe, including in terms of technology, so such occurrences must be taken into account as a possibility because they can arise.
I can imagine that. Here on Earth, we do not have to go far to experience something similar, such as when one country's army invades another country, as happened in Israel in the Gaza Strip, where the Israeli mass murderer Netanyahu waged a Nazi-like war of genocide, which is actually still not over and unofficially continues. This mass murderer in Israel is allowing his murderous army to continue, now also in Lebanon, where they are shooting at the Blue Helmets or peacekeeping forces. The Russian army also invaded Ukraine, triggering the war in Ukraine, which was started by Russia solely because of America's fault, because America, especially the then senile and sick President Biden, together with the warmongering and corrupt clown President Zelensky of Ukraine, wanted to bring the murderous organization NATO into Ukraine for the sake of dying. And, in a reckless and idiotic move, many Western states intervened in this war, thereby breeding a peculiar and strange further world war, namely by many of the Nazi-minded governments of the West, out of hatred for Russia, with the Nazi-infested German government in particular excelling and continuing to excel, supplying weapons and much other war material to Zelensky, and continuing to do so. This means that he can continue to indulge in his lust for war, and his greed for wealth, and continue the war for as long as he wants. And as you said last year, it would have been over long ago, if he had not continued it with lies, and unscrupulously lied to the people, and sent tens of thousands to their deaths. You also said that his patriotism is nothing but a sham and a cover for his Nazi-like belligerence, and his insane lust for power and wealth. As you were able to ascertain the summer before last, Zelensky is corrupt and enriches himself horrendously like all the other corrupt scoundrels in Ukraine, although he now hypocritically fights them and thereby distracts attention from himself because he wants to get away with being the chief villain of corruption. Furthermore, it should be stated clearly and unequivocally that the evil theater of war, as you yourself observed and stated, is an evil and criminal enterprise spanning various countries, driven by greed for money, and supported by America, in which, as you mentioned, Zelensky himself is also involved, which is why he is exercising his belligerence, and begging other countries for weapons, etc., and fueling malicious and unjustified hatred against Russia. And when I honestly consider what you said, that practically everything was and continues to be controlled by America, including the fact that Russia was forced to start the war by the behavior of the then senile US President Biden, then I am not surprised. This is especially true because the murderous NATO organization wants to creep closer to Russia, contrary to the early sacred promise made by the Americans in the 1990s that there would never be an eastward expansion of this murderous organization towards Russia's borders. Although this promise was soon broken, and almost all the eastern states were incorporated into this organization. When Ukraine was also to be taken over, it became too much for Russia, which consequently started the war because, as Putin and his co-rulers mistakenly thought, there was no other solution, which has already caused enormous destruction and many deaths. The fact that the war was started cannot be condoned or accepted, because wars are as wrong and criminal as any other murder. And the fact that this war in Ukraine was further fueled and turned into a strange world war was due to the fact that many irresponsible leaders, as well as sick, senseless, and stupid idiots from various Western nations, who were howling with hatred, agreed to supply Zelensky with weapons and other war material, and are still doing so. In Germany in particular, the Nazi-minded members of the government are still making themselves heard, and are provocatively challenging Russia, in the hope that it will attack Germany, and with it, the murderous organization, NATO. The latter is stationed in Northern Europe and is just waiting for this lie to come true so that it can strike, although the rulers in Russia are currently not at all interested in such an attack, because other things are currently in preparation, namely something that Zelensky opposes with false patriotism in order to continue indulging his bloodlust and lust for power, who also wants to be the greatest through his delusional behavior. This is despite the fact that German Chancellor Merz is so deluded and stupid, as well as obviously warmongering in his attitude and Nazi-like, that he is calling on the equally deluded Zelensky to prevent young Ukrainians from continuing to flee the country, and instead order them to the front. This affects all young men who want peace instead of war, and do not want to be involved in such a conflict. Unfortunately, this Nazi mentality is widespread among those in power in many countries, although it is quite clear that many citizens do not understand what I actually mean by Nazis and Nazi mentality, as evidenced by this letter from Miss who asks what she should understand by this. I am happy to explain this again, although I have already done so once before, but this time I will phrase it differently, and hope that it will now be understood correctly, including by you, Miss, and since you diligently read the contact reports, as you write, you can now read everything. So, Nazi-like, Nazi ideology, and everything else with Nazi in its name has to do with the ideology that, during the last World War, from 1939 to 1945, the Nazis were those who had committed themselves to National Socialism, or simply adhered to it in their ideology. This was also linked to anti-Semitism, hostility towards Jews, and hatred of Jews, that is to say, absolute contempt and racial hatred towards fellow human beings who did not share the Christian faith. However, the main form of Nazi ideology is based on the fact that deep down, hatred and murder, revenge, retribution and destruction, and thus war and malicious behavior, lurk deep in the character and erupt immediately when the opportunity arises, as was characteristic of the Nazis. And it is this primitive behavior that I must denounce in those who govern various countries. It is this effectively inhuman attitude and lust for power, as well as the pathological self-importance of those in power, and their arrogant, conceited, self-centered, presumptuous, condescending, complacent and irresponsible way of thinking, that spreads to parts of the population, and turns them into like-minded people and followers. There are only a few in the governments who are normal thinking and normal-minded, but they have no chance whatsoever to put forward even a little of their righteous thinking and apply it, to separate themselves from the Nazi mentality of the flawed Nazi rulers, and to assert themselves peacefully. This is because all those who are trapped in their false thoughts, and who believe the lies and falsifications invented by deceitful Bible writers and who lie in their Bible works that Emmanuel alias Jesus is supposed to have said, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth." I have not come to bring peace, but the sword. Matthew 10:34. And further lies are given in the Bible, such as in Luke 12:51. Do you think that I have come to bring peace on earth? I tell you, no, but rather division. In truth, he never said such a thing, for his teaching was that of the Nicodemeans, and in it there is nothing that would contain discord, murder and manslaughter, as well as the death penalty, war and terror, nor foul words against those of other faiths or for racial hatred, revenge and retribution, or simply hatred, or any other kind of evil against human beings or life forms in general. Accordingly, Emmanuel taught something completely different, for he taught that earthly man should live in grace and love, happiness, good nature, and peacefulness, and thus always live in peace and never oppress or kill other people, but should also respect and honor the lives of all other living beings. And this also includes, as I see and understand it, that in governments, those persons and their opinions and contributions are also respected and followed, who are worthy of justice, and in full human power, and in all peacefulness, equality, dignity, and honor, and all empathy for all life and all-encompassing justice. But this is precisely what has become alien to humans since ancient times, and is degenerating more and more in the present day, both within the circles of each individual government of each country, and among all peoples. Thus, the effective general stupidity of the great masses of the peoples is also advancing, starting with the young people, whose general education, knowledge, and skills are so neglected and alarmingly worthless, drug-induced and insignificant that it cries out to the heavens. And this is the case in all governments, where those who are not yet corrupt and who think truthfully, honestly, and correctly for their office, and empathetically for the people, are treated like dirt. But these are only individuals, and they have no chance of being heard. And that this is indeed the case is illustrated by the following example, which Eva gave me from a newspaper article that I cut out and am reproducing here. VCFO.
Golden rules.
Even more painful is experiencing this lack of compassion when heads of state send people to war or deliver weapons. Whether Trump or Putin, Zelensky or Netanyahu, Merz or Macron, and many others who could be named, when they send people to their deaths, they are not affected. And when you hear them speak, you sense that they do not feel what it is like for the people who have been ordered to kill one another. The leadership circle of the CDU, which invokes Christian values but is currently the strongest agitator for war, has obviously never heard anything about love of one's neighbor or even love of one's enemy. The structures of our society lead to isolation and indifference toward the fate of others. The increasingly fragmented society of the Federal Republic would be well advised to follow the example of its European neighbors and introduce empathy as a school subject. Those who would especially need remedial lessons are the politicians currently in charge, who are further dividing society and, with their irresponsible rhetoric, could drive us into a major war. Then there would be hope that they would once again orient themselves on the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and recognize that in the atomic age humanity can only survive together or find safety together. Zelensky Netanyahu is the former finance minister of Germany and a former chairman of the SPD.
Now my question. What did Arlian and his giant crew find out about all the things that simply fell out of the air onto my desk somewhere on the 3rd of February, 2021, with Bridget and Madeline witnessing it? They too are excited to find out what has happened.
Unfortunately, they were unable to determine the origin, despite their efforts over the years to do so and their endeavors to find out where it came from.
So there was nothing there either, just like with the 3 expensive books that disappeared. The same thing happened when I was doing Patrick and Pius's bookkeeping, and a 500-franc note disappeared, that was lying on the table in front of Patrick and me, but then suddenly reappeared. The same thing happened to Pius and me when 10 bundled 50-franc notes suddenly disappeared from the table in front of our eyes, leaving no trace and never reappearing. The same thing had happened many years earlier, when a 100-franc note that Piero had given me, along with 7 others, disappeared without a trace. However, this note suddenly reappeared, but how and where it came from remained a mystery to us. We were unable to fathom what the whole thing was about, and what was actually behind it, just as we could not with the books and the 2 incidents involving Patrick and Pius. And now Arlion and his crew were also unable to find out anything about what had simply fallen out of the air onto my desk, as Madeline and Bridget can testify. There were 2 rather elaborate leather key rings made of expensive leather, on which my name, etc. was written, along with a very expensive high-carat gold bracelet, a large gold coin, and a small 10-gram gold bar. Their origin, and how they could have simply fallen out of the air onto my desk, could never be clarified, nor could the origin of the other cheap items that fell onto my desk several times.
I am aware of this, because Tau informed us about it, as we should know what was and is going on around you. And now, since we have learned more about you from him over the last few days, we also know that you were examined in a variety of ways, and in great detail, by our specialists from your earliest days, that is to say immediately after your birth, and also in your younger years, in terms of how you view your life and this in general, how sustainable it will be, and how your self-development and integrity will turn out with regard to your mission. Your diverse abilities, which you will acquire in the course of your life, were also explored, as well as how you will act appropriately, correctly, and properly in accordance with the rules of life. It was also explored how you will lead your life in accordance with the rules of life, but also in accordance with the rules of life and in accordance with the order of life, as befits a herald of the Nocademion teaching. Then you were also tested in everything and everyone, and constantly monitored, as you led your industrious life in many countries around the world over the years, learning and preparing for your mission, and becoming the person you now embody. And Tau informed us that, fortunately, everything in this regard turned out as planned through the tests, and that you are dedicated to your mission, and carry it out with confidence and responsibility. And that we should all know, Quetzal, and Jenna, Florina, and I, who, how, and what you really are. So we should ask you for a description of yourself, which is in your possession and was written about 20 years ago by a psychological expert. If I may ask you to let me read this description, if you still have it then.
I think that this is probably the graphological report, which was indeed written about 20 years ago by a very experienced psychologist, based on my handwriting and personal conversations. A very nice and knowledgeable woman. But there was also a psychologist in Austria, and one in England, who assessed my handwriting in the same way, although I was only able to talk to the man from Austria in person. Both had roughly the same assessments as the psychologist, with only a few descriptions or nuances and perspectives differing from each other, but basically interpreting the same thing. If I remember correctly, we published the woman's report at the time. Note, first published in Pleiadisch-Pleiadenische Kontaktberichte, Pleiadian Contact Reports Block 11, 456th Contact, the 18th of November 2007, page 265F, Fle. I am sure I still have it saved somewhere on my computer, but I am afraid I am useless when it comes to searching for things on it, as I do not know how to use it. My work on the computer is related to writing, but that only involves the functions I need for my direct work. The rest is not so important to me that I would bother with it often, or even constantly.
I can help you with that, if we just.
Of course, if you want to.
That is.
Yes, that is it. I would not have found it so quickly. I am too stupid for that. I do not know anything about this thing. I just work with it, and that is it.
Then I want to read it right away, because I am very interested in it, which also applies to Injena and Florina.
As you wish, if you have time for it.
I have plenty of time. Then I want to.
Graphological personality assessment for Mr. Edward A. Meier, born 03.02. 1937.
The handwritten samples of your official's handwriting that you have provided me with show a particular characteristic, the strongly pronounced smallness of the letters and the great precision of the form and spatial image. Other dominant features include the disconnectedness of the letters and the sharpness of the strokes. The small size of your handwriting is specific to your personality and has remained almost unchanged over the decades, as all comparative writing samples from your youth have shown. The size of your writing shows how a person expands in life and how much space they take up for themselves. People who write in small letters, like you, are very economical because they save energy with their impulses and use them sensibly and rationally. They also want to gain a better overview because the smaller the writing, the greater the overview you gain. At the same time, small handwriting indicates a person's conscious self-restraint, self-sufficiency, and inner modesty. They do not put themselves and their ego in the spotlight in order to attract attention, but remain modest and rather inconspicuous, concentrating on themselves. The smallness of your handwriting is a deliberately restrained and concentrated movement that aims at sober moderation and restraint, as well as a high degree of objectivity and a pronounced sense of reality. People who write in small letters, like you, are highly focused in their work, precise and absolutely love precision. It is therefore clear that your objective competence is exceptionally strong and takes precedence in your life over your personal competence, which rejects appearance, charisma, impact, and even arrogance, vanity, haughtiness. The sharpness of your strokes reinforces these characteristics and your ability to think and act with precision. It shows you to be a very self-disciplined, controlled, level-headed person who can maintain composure and remain stable in the face of external influences. This clearly demonstrates the predominance of your rationality and your differentiated thinking. In conjunction with the strong regularity, your handwriting reveals you to be a person with a strong organizing will, who willingly and consciously submits to rules that he recognizes as right and important in order to achieve his self-set goals in a structured and systematic manner. This also consciously restrains impulsive drives in order to gain time through economy and perseverance. Your aesthetic needs are striking, with a tendency towards a strong urge for clarity. On the other hand, you hide your true self behind your stylistic handwriting because you do not want to reveal yourself naked. Your handwriting clearly shows that you demand a lot of yourself through iron discipline, and are willing to make sacrifices by taking a back seat personally, in order to make your gifts and abilities available to the environment, in the service of others. Your handwriting indicates a high sense of responsibility and duty, which determines your attitudes, principles, and behavior. The performance aspect, achieved through a high degree of self-discipline and self-control, through consistency and tireless diligence, is enormous. You are a very solid person, with a practical mind and a special ability to specialize in one or more areas, like a Swiss watchmaker. To achieve this goal, you have strong willpower at your disposal, which gives you the necessary consistency, focus, and a great deal of patience, which only a strong nervous system can provide, one that can control and master its impulses, emotions, and feelings. In your approach, you are determined, tenacious, conscientious, and capable, and you consistently follow the path that you have identified as the right one. You do not implement plans and projects haphazardly and rashly in a flash in the pan, but rather calmly, step by step, after careful consideration weighing up all the pros and cons, and you are persistent in achieving your goals, which leads you to success. Your intellectual abilities identify you as a mentally agile person who strives for clarity and overview, and is therefore an attentive observer. Once again, your considered objectivity, your reasonable, logical, and critical analytical thinking skills, as well as your unconditional love of order and diligence, which predestine you to be a perfectionist, should be emphasized. You combine two things in one: your demand for clarity and order, and the ability to take even the smallest detail into account and devote your full attention to it. This can only be achieved with a high degree of willpower, self-control, and consistency, all of which you possess in abundance. Your emotional side reveals you to be an emotionally responsive, sensitive, and delicate person with a serious outlook on life. You always strive for equanimity and balance so that you do not lose your inner focus and good balance. This enables you to control your emotions and temperamental outbursts, as well as to avoid conflicts and problems with other people through your peacefulness. In the event of unavoidable disputes, you react with understanding and look for constructive solutions without deliberately hurting or harming the other person. Your introverted side comes to the fore when dealing with problems. You then usually withdraw, reflect, think things over, and try to consciously recognize the lesson behind the problem and integrate it into your wealth of experience. Your ego shows balance, inner stability and resilience, as well as inner modesty and a well-understood humility, even to the point of self-restraint, in that you set yourself limits and sometimes impose inhibitions on the expression of your personality. This is because your writing shows more signs of restraint and reserve than of completely free expression of your personality. You repeatedly restrain and discipline yourself, limiting your capacity for enjoyment and sensuality in favor of a more ascetic lifestyle. Your vitality area reveals a strong restraint of your drives and impulses with only low intensity due to a consciously chosen, very restrained urge to move. This is because your dynamism and drives are very sparingly and economically focused on what is important, necessary, and rational. Your handwriting reveals a somewhat tense physical and psychological basic structure, which is why you are not so relaxed and easygoing and find it difficult to unwind. Although you want to be close to others in your interpersonal behavior and need contact and communication, your handwriting reveals a need for independence. A healthy mistrust makes you cautious and non-committal, and keeps you at a distance. To protect yourself from excessive closeness and a possible loss of control in your devotion to another person, you tend to hold back, allow only a few people to get really close to you, and give only a select few insight into your inner self. You are anything but a party animal, but rather a very nature-loving, rather introverted individualist for whom a few long-standing friendships are more important than many new acquaintances. For you, real, genuine values in interpersonal relationships are what count. As your official writing shows strong tendencies towards attachment, the expression of your personality is monitored and restrained by a high degree of rational control. But you believe in the saying, "Strength lies in calmness." You are a person of inner wealth who strives for harmony and wants to live in harmony with the environment. This makes you the guardian of the inner world. However, in contrast to the official's handwriting, there is also the very personal, private, almost intimate scribbled handwriting of Mr. Edward Meier, which does not deserve this self-described negative attribute at all, as it has a high level of formality. It is only in this very individual handwriting that your personal characteristics and nature are expressed much more than in the official's one. The completely different signature, which stands in such striking contrast to the text, already revealed that behind the formal conventionality there is another person known only to a few confidants and friends. In contrast to the former, this other handwriting is so full of life, vibrating and trembling in a rapid, deft rhythm, with such originality and naturalness that it provides insight into the core of the writer's being, their very self. Only here does your personal character become clear, revealing your creativity, your talent, your inner self-confidence, and also your personal individuality, which can only be seen in your departure from the school norm. The dominant features of the scribbled handwriting have shifted compared to those of the official handwriting. There is a greater connection between the letters, a greater rightward slant, more width, and greater variation in length, as well as looseness and an emphasis on movement. It is only here that your range of talents comes into play. Great versatility, spontaneity, improvisational skills, initiative, expansion, and the desire to constantly explore new areas. In the intellectual sphere, too, previously hidden intuition, great inner differentiation, inventiveness, and a wealth of ideas, as well as the quick reactions of a forward-looking, future-oriented, open-minded person, become apparent. The second writing clearly shows your drive, your love of movement, and your self-confident, naturally unforced core, which can also turn to the beautiful sides of life in a relaxed and easygoing manner. The emotional realm reveals you to be a sensitive, empathetic person with a great depth of feeling. In your interpersonal relationships, you show a very strong, trusting and understanding attitude towards your environment, as well as helpfulness and openness. When interpersonal problems arise, your diplomacy and your smooth and peace-loving adaptability come to the fore. Despite your inner strength and confidence, you are not someone who has to bang their head against a brick wall and control, dominate, or manipulate others, but rather someone with a live and let-live attitude. In terms of performance, your great versatility and open-mindedness come to the fore, allowing you to continue to progress without stagnating or coming to a standstill. Your scribbled handwriting also reveals your intellectual principles of order, always living moderately in the middle and at peace with yourself, uncomplicated and in harmony with your environment. Your official handwriting reflects the self-image you have acquired yourself or taken on from your parents, teachers, and other educators, while your scribbled handwriting reflects your original, natural personality, which you have retained. It shows who you really are, what you are capable of being and achieving, while the other handwriting shows the image you want to project to the outside world, how you want to be seen by those around you. Your official handwriting reveals your values, moral and ethical, the principles and rules that shape your life and all your actions, often through unconscious attitudes and enormous amounts of knowledge. Here, the appearance censored by the mind contrasts with a reshaping and transformation of your deeper layer, your true core essence. This being no longer needs to lead a shadowy existence, but can reveal itself even in public, as it has more richness, character, and inner vitality from a graphological and handwriting psychological perspective, combined with a higher handwriting format. This clear handwriting reveals the true, natural, genuine, unadulterated Edward Meier, who is not constrained by external forms and can truly show himself for who he is, an intelligent, versatile, open-minded, mentally agile, talented person with a heart and a clear mind, who combines all aspects within himself, professional, social, and natural personality skills, with high emotional intelligence, who is also a master within himself. Meters. Passelweiler, psychologist, graphologist, Cologne, Germany, 31st October, 2007.
Remarkable, truly remarkable. May I photocopy this for Florina and Injana? The three of us were not aware of this, and we have only just been informed by Tal that this description was made. I would like to add my opinion, which is that since I have known you, I have perceived and assessed you in the manner described here, as Florina and Injana have also noted, and the three of us have discussed our findings together. What is described in this graphological report confirms our observations and assessments, and I would like you to include this accurate graphological description of your character as part of the conversation we had.
I can do that, but it was already published in a bulletin about 20 years ago, and may even have been mentioned in a contact report. But I think Quetzalcoatl could have told you that earlier, because they knew it too. Apparently, it is as we say, the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing.
That is not as you say, because our principle is based on the fact that we only turn our attention to and deal with what concerns our direct task, which ensures that we maintain control over it and cannot be distracted. My task and that of Florina and Injana is different from that of Quetzal, because his task is to maintain direct contact with you, which means that he has to know and understand the nature of your being, and all the events of your life, as was already the case with your time with Swath, and then also with Sin Yusei and Tao. However, Forena, Injena, and I have a completely different task, which is not related to you in any way, which is why it was not necessary to inform the three of us about you and your nature. Only now is this necessary, because Quetzal will be absent more often in the future, and the three of us will officially have to take over his duties. For this reason, Ta has now informed us in detail about you and your nature, so that from now on we will not only visit you as friends, as we have done until now, but also officially in the exercise of our connecting task.
This was never discussed, so now I am standing there like a donkey on a mountain. When I think about it, I feel like an idiot for not having thought this through myself, and for not being able to recognize it.
You really have no reason to berate yourself for this, because if you were never made aware of our behavior regarding the division of tasks, then it is not your fault, but rather negligence and failure on our part.
As you wish, but let us leave it at that, because there are other things that are probably more important to discuss, such as this letter from Germany, with this supplement and the questions.
Question from J.H. Germany. How should Switzerland's democracy be assessed? I would be very grateful for your answer to my question, if you both would bring it up in one of your contact reports, when you speak to Mr. Quetzal, who, together with his people, should please intervene and do the right thing, so that everything finally becomes good and peaceful in our world and for all its inhabitants. I would also like to know what you think about what Merkel has done with her welcome culture. I believe that many other people are interested in this and think the same as I do, as well as what you, Mr. Billy, have to say. However, please do not mention my name or address, because I found the following in a newspaper and find it worrying that it is actually true, as I have repeatedly heard from myself and other people. But I wonder how you see it, Mr. Billy. Hans Herbert von Arnim, born the 16th of November 1939 in Darmstadt, is a German constitutional lawyer at the German University of Administrative Sciences Speyer. He is a well-known critic of the party state in Germany and Europe, especially the financing of parties and the support of politicians. His publications, Die Deutschlandak, the Germany File, and Die Hebelder macht UNDWERSIE obedient, the levers of power and who operates them, became bestsellers. Except from Wikipedia, org, Wiki Hans Herbert von Arnim.
I have already received the same excerpt from Germany, and have included it in Zeichen number 177, November 2nd. Zeichen, which I produce 3 to 4 times a month from newspaper articles sent to me from Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, can be found on the FIGU website figu.org. When I speak with Quetzal, as you say, I can certainly put your questions to him, because you think that other people are also interested in what will happen, but Quetzal will not answer, because he and the Pleiaren in general do not interfere in any way in anything on Earth, and certainly not in political matters or any other matters that arise around the world. Their task and their interests consist firstly in determining the extent to which the teachings of Nocademion, which I teach and disseminate here on Earth as a result of an ancient decree, are bearing fruit worldwide, whereby individual human beings are to develop knowledge, self-knowledge, effective truth-thinking, true peace, and also happiness voluntarily, and thus without indoctrination. It is hoped that this will finally minimize, and ultimately eliminate the negative aspects of all discord, violence, crime, strife and hatred, as well as falsehood and deceit, lust for power, all forms of degeneration, including murder, war and terror, etc. But this root cause can only be dissolved in the same way that it was brought here by those who traveled far and gained a foothold among the people of Earth, namely that reality and its truth are recognized, seen, honestly appreciated and respected by humans, instead of clinging to a religious delusion based on the delusion that one of the far-traveled was God, as others of the far-traveled were other gods, or angels, and the like. And there is no doubt that this brought about strife, violence, war, terror, and destruction. Believers in God should think about this. But to your question, apparently, the precariousness of democracy is recognized not only in various countries by individual members of the population, such as you and me, but also by people who deal with constitutional rights, such as this, Mr. von Arnhem. My answer to your question is this. I will not, of course, reveal your name or place of residence, because I do not want to cause you any trouble or compromise you in any way, and thus damage your reputation. Well, I will answer your question as an exception, but really only as an exception, because I think it addresses an issue that concerns billions of people worldwide, including millions here in Switzerland, but only a few of whom have the courage to speak their minds. Here in Switzerland, democracy is no different than in any other country in the world. Here too, democracy is such that the people are officially the nominal masters and sovereigns, and can express their will through votes, but this is not always implemented in accordance with the effective will of the people. This is something that proves itself from time to time, because what has been decided by election is simply stifled and something else is done with the mendacious claim that the new thing is better and more necessary, etc. This is not democracy, but populism and self-importance of the highest order. And this happens in Switzerland just as it does elsewhere in other democratic countries. In addition, and this should now be said and explained for the umpteenth time, despite Swiss neutrality, a member of the Federal Council on the federal government side has adopted and applied sanctions against Russia imposed by the EU dictatorship, which is tantamount to treason. This is because Switzerland's perpetual neutrality and the inviolability of Swiss territory, which were recognized and guaranteed by the European great powers at the Congress of Vienna in 1815, meant that Switzerland was spared from Adolf Hitler's Nazi army and from the war in the last World War. Neutrality, as it is to be understood, clearly means that in a conflict or disagreement between other states, no party may ever be taken or favored, and that the state and its government, as well as the entire population, must therefore be absolutely impartial. In terms of international law, this also means that the neutral state of Switzerland must remain completely out of any armed or other political conflicts between other states, and may not provide any military support, not even in the form of language or advice. In everyday life, neutrality also means that individuals should never interfere in the disputes of others, as is also the case for individuals or organizations, and that they must strictly ensure that they remain neutral in all political matters, and never express a political opinion or take a political stance. Neutrality therefore means not taking anyone's side, and not interfering in any conflicts. In an international context, this means that a truly neutral country does not wage war with other states, nor does it interfere politically in conflicts or wars between other states, or provide them with military support. However, neutrality also means that a neutral state never offers itself as a political mediator, or participates in humanitarian war actions. This is because such actions and conduct will certainly and absolutely create hostility on one side or the other, often underlying. As already mentioned, private individuals must also maintain neutrality, and thus cultivate an impartial attitude, for example in a dispute, where neutrality requires not taking sides, and not siding with one party or the other, but rather staying out of the dispute. If it is necessary to intervene in a dispute, for example if it becomes dangerous, this must be done with complete neutrality, and if necessary, in a purposeful manner, through purposeful, and in no way harmful physical intervention. However, the culpable government official in Bern who adopted and applied the sanctions imposed by the EU dictatorship against Russia was not held accountable for this, nor was he removed from office, but was allowed to remain in office, and was apparently still supported by his colleagues. This raises the question of what is actually going on in the government, and when one considers what was done to traitors to the country during the last war, something that was inhumane and wrong, despite their betrayal. There is probably nothing more to say about the handling of so-called democracy, because even in Switzerland, which is now only supposedly neutral, it is nothing more than what Hans Herbert von Arnim says. This is truly extremely regrettable. As for Mrs. Merkel's welcome culture in Germany, it has triggered a refugee crisis worldwide and cost thousands of lives, and the whole situation continues to unfold in this way, because it cannot be stopped in the short or long term. Refugees of all kinds from so-called third world countries will continue to flee to the rich industrialized countries in the north of the planet and flood them, while many will continue to die on the way there. And all because the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, unleashed her ill-considered madness of a welcome culture, which she still praises, defends, and, in her sheer stupidity, considers to be right, even though it has resulted in thousands of deaths, and many more will continue to lose their lives. But Angela Merkel does not care, because in her idiocy she is completely irresponsible, and also as dumb as a box of rocks, and so sick in the head that she unscrupulously sees only herself, and nothing else, except of course her imaginary God, as she was taught as a pastor's daughter. But now I have the following. During the last informational meeting with Michael on the 9th of October 2025, the terms pious and holy were used, whereby I explained to him what I had learned with Svath, through leaps in time, into the past regarding the language used in the place of use, which is now called German. Piety and holy were used, and I explained to him what I had learned with Svath through time, jumps into the past regarding the language used in that place, which today, however, is absolutely misrepresented by wannabe ancient language experts. The fact that old terms for religions have been and continue to be stolen and falsified for believers, even though these terms have nothing to do with religious belief, and never have had, is deliberately concealed. For example, the terms pious and piety refer to teaching oneself, learning for oneself, communicating with oneself, that is to say, instructing and educating oneself, guiding and training oneself, etc. And therefore these words have absolutely nothing to do with faith. Pious originates from the Middle High German word vroom, which meant capable, good, self-made, self-motivated, and useful, as well as self-serving, and still has these values today, and refers to the fact that people teach themselves something capable and useful, internalize it, communicate it, instruct or teach it, etc. The extended form piety refers to the fact that people strive to be pious or strive to teach themselves to be capable and useful. So the term pious never had anything to do with faith and religion, and consequently does not refer to the religious meaning of believing in God, or being devoted to God, etc. This religious falsehood, which is common today, developed in the 15th century, and has persisted as a lie to this day. Consequently, religious believers are being lied to and deceived through and through. But that is their business and their concern, as is the case with the terms salvation and holy, which are even more mendacious than the falsification of the word pious. Before the advent of Old High German, holy originated in a previous language from the term Heiliger, which meant to think, but in Old High German it was changed to the word heilig, which meant something like to use healthily, or to use intact, but ultimately simply formed as healthy and intact. However, this was derived to mean auspicious application, which originally also meant delimited, concentrated, or symbolic. Originally, the delimited or concentrated referred to something that had the value of something symbolic, an object, an image, or anything else that could be used as a visible object of concentration, when simple, normal mental meditative concentration could not be achieved due to distracting thoughts or external influences, etc. Then the term was also changed in Germanic to the word helgen, which means to appropriate, and leads back to the original term heiliger. And this is obviously something that is either unknown to researchers of ancient languages, or is misinterpreted. The term holy has been and continues to be distorted by religious belief contrary to its true value as consecrated and associated with that which is supposed to be connected with God. In addition, a place, an object, or a person is called holy in a religious context. However, holy has nothing to do with anything special about religion, because this word is only a linguistic or verbal term for something symbolic in the form of an object of concentration, whereby, when viewed in the sense of faith, it incorrectly describes everything in a religious context that is in some way connected with a truthfully imaginary and only delusional, but supposedly true God, such as, for example, a person, a place, or an object, such as supposedly holy oil or holy water, etc. For people afflicted with religious delusion, unfortunately, no fanaticism, no delusion, lie or fantasy, and no delusion is true and grotesque enough to recognize the constructed farce of religion, to turn thoughtlessly and recklessly to its blinding window dressing and deception, instead of facing reality and its truth. This is not only a pity, but it is extremely regrettable, because the world would be completely different if the people of Earth thought and behaved in a realistic manner, namely, more oriented towards true peace and love. And this without hatred, revenge, and retaliation, without strife, violence, war, murder, and manslaughter to the extent that the whole long everyday life is dominated by the existence and actions of humanity in this regard. This is idiotic, although I must explain, while I am on the subject of explaining terms, that I never ever refer to people who suffer from ADHD, that is to say, a pathological neurological developmental disorder, based on symptoms of attention deficit, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention, as idiotic or idiots. ADHD can occur in childhood, and can cause difficulties and impairments in school, at work, and in social situations, putting people at a disadvantage. However, when I refer to people as idiotic or idiots, it is never meant as an insult or an indication that they are not normal. Idiotic and idiot are colloquial terms that refer solely to being absurd, delusional, nonsensical, crazy, foolish, reckless, and therefore stupid, thoughtless, foolish, unwise, offensive, mean, as well as silly, crazy, stupid, dull, unwise, slow-witted, mistaken, or absurd in speech or action. And honestly, when it comes to myself, I have to say that when I say something without thinking it through, I consider it idiotic and stupid, because that is what it is, and it is the truth, which I cannot hide from myself.
I have not dealt with these issues enough to be able to have a conversation with you about them.
I did not think you should, because I just thought I should talk about it, and inform you about what I am currently thinking about, so that you could gain some insight.
That is indeed the case, because you are bringing some things to my attention that I can investigate.
Good. Then I am not just talking into thin air. But what still interests me, and why I want to pepper you with questions about what you, Florina, and Anjana had to deal with regarding the intruders, is what ultimately happened.
At first it was very unpleasant, because the intruders were alien beings and appeared in great numbers with a very large armada.
An armed force, so to speak. So, in the ANKAR universe, how could it be otherwise? Apart from you, Playerin, and all the peaceful members of the Federation, there are also humans or human-like beings, etc., who are more unpeaceful and warlike.
That is indeed the case, and the invaders were effectively alien beings, that is to say not humans like us, but different, yet human-like beings from 17 peoples, who, in addition to the Armada, came with an immense immigration association from a galaxy 4,637 light-years away, and from a system they call Infested. This system is doomed to destruction by an absolutely unstoppable cosmic catastrophe, which has already destroyed much of the system. As a result, the Armada that had always existed and a necessary immigration association were joined together, and left the cosmically threatened Infested system in order to find a new system in the vastness of the cosmos, and settle on a suitable planet. According to Earth time, they were traveling for more than 12 years before they found a galaxy and a system of our Federation, as they intended to settle there, but did not know that everything is part of our Federation's territory, which is controlled and belongs to our peacefulness. However, as we cannot allow an armada, these intruders were stopped by our Federation members in charge of each area, and consequently, everything necessary was immediately done to communicate with them, and Indiana, Florina, and I were called in to conduct the necessary investigations and subsequent negotiations, the terms of which were determined by the Federation Committee.
But that obviously took very little time. And when I think that something like that would not be possible here on Earth with the Earthlings, because the incompetent and crazy people in the governments here are incapable of quick, efficient, clear thinking and action and would need many months or even years to conduct the necessary clarifications and subsequent negotiations, then something like that would not be possible at all. Our idiotic rulers are incapable of thinking and acting quickly and efficiently for something like this because, in their idiocy, they would not be capable of doing so at all. The majority of all rulers, as unfortunately also the majority of the Earth's population, with the exception of a small minority, are afflicted with a Nazi mentality, and cannot even imagine something like what has now happened with you, Playaran, and your geographically extensive federation and its members. This event would be absolutely impossible here on Earth due to that part of the idiotic-minded rulers and peoples, because firstly, such events are not foreseen, and have certainly never been considered before, and secondly, if it had been the case, then such crazy and confused, and therefore idiotically stupid laws, rules and regulations, etc., would have been created that would have been practically hostile to such an occurrence. This is precisely because the idiotic pseudo-thinking and actions of the part of the rulers and the peoples would have made the whole thing impossible. But if it had been possible, and such a thing had been considered, and actually happened, then first of all, there would be a vicious military intervention, certainly claiming many lives, perhaps even triggering a reckless war against the invading people seeking help and a home. However, if it were the case, which is very unlikely, that a reasonably peaceful or completely peaceful event of this kind were to occur, then decisions would have to be made in such a case, but these would not be reached quickly. Instead, they would require lengthy investigations, security measures, and, in addition, very long and complicated negotiations, as is customary on Earth.
Unfortunately, that is true, considering everything I have experienced here on Earth so far.
Nothing remains hidden from you. Similarly, the Earthlings have such thoughts, but in such a way that they want to move to Mars, thereby mistakenly believing that they will solve the problem of overpopulation. But these empty-headed people will have their unpleasant experiences. Also in the sense that those who have traveled far have been here on Earth for a very long time. Well, I mean, it should be enough that they make their presence known very often. The idiotic rulers, military and peoples, at least those of these stupid Earthlings, whose intelligence is so deficient that in their arrogance, stupidity, lust for power, and in their blind ignorance and megalomania, in their arrogance, selfishness, and Nazi mentality, cannot understand anything, and even have UFOs shot at, cannot imagine in their pseudo-thinking what evil and harm they are causing and provoking. What do you think about this?
What, my friend?
Well, our universe, like all 6 other universes of creation, is immeasurably large, so self-thinking and self-acting life forms, such as humans and human-like beings, as well as completely alien entities, do not occur en masse in the cosmos of the 7 universes of creation, which then...
Of course not, because as you know, the colonization of planets in all the galaxies and their solar systems by humans, humanoids, non-humanoids and other beings is not very common.
Of course, I know. So, in all the galaxies there are also solar systems where there is enough space for beings who, for whatever reason, have left their home world and have to search for new planets on which they can settle again.
That is correct. In a large Federation area, there are still systems that have planets and support natural life, but no higher life. After thorough clarification of all necessary issues, a meeting of the Committee on Error was convened, which also represents our Federation as a whole. There, it was decided that the 17 peoples of the little more than 473 million alien beings who call themselves Huruk, and with whom we have to communicate via rapidly developed language devices, would be assigned a suitable planet in a system of our Federation as their new home. However, this was only on condition that the Armada was immediately disbanded and its arsenal of weapons destroyed. This was the task of Florina, Ingenna, and myself, but it required lengthy negotiations and ultimately required all the alien beings to be of the same mind. After lengthy negotiations, unanimity was reached within 15 days and nights, whereupon the destruction of the Huruk Armada's arsenal of weapons was carried out over a period of 2 days, and the alien beings were brought to their new home, where they will live for the next 500 years, without the possibility of leaving the planet, while they are taught and instructed in peacefulness by our Federation members, and have to learn this in order to be accepted into our Federation after this period, if everything turns out satisfactorily. The different races of beings, whose average lifespan is only about 140 years, are decisive in ensuring that over the next 500 years, peacefulness will permeate to such an extent that it will become the norm. Since the long-standing Armada, which, we were assured, was only maintained to be ready for emergencies, was not designed to be aggressive or warlike, a quick agreement was reached, and the decision was made as I mentioned.
If such understanding and the necessary reason prevailed here on Earth among those in power and among people in general, then we could truly speak of a paradise on Earth. But that is not possible here, because everything is dishonest to the point of no return, right up to those in power, for there are only very few righteous people who are truly honest and correct, as is proven by the excerpt from the article by the former chairman of the SPD and finance minister of Germany, Oskar Lafontaine, on page 8975, who spoke candidly about what is actually going on in governments and what the stupid majority of the people accept and do not defend themselves against. This is particularly evident at the present time in America, where dictator Trump is now wielding his dictatorial scourge and tyrannizing the whole world without anyone seriously intervening or fearlessly kicking this nasty piece of work out of office. But unfortunately, this is not being done, because everyone is afraid of him, especially those who rule the world and their followers, who are not only idiotic power-hungry people, but also liars, cowards, and sycophants. Unfortunately, much of this world is nothing more than a mendacious religious fairy tale, which has been fraudulently and deceitfully propagated and cultivated since time immemorial by false religious books and believers, and which has become morbidly and delusionally ingrained in people's minds and brains.
Unfortunately, there is nothing that can be done about this that would be effective and bring about a change for the better. After all that we have explored and discovered here on Earth so far with regard to overall intelligence and the effective, valuable application of intelligence, everything in this regard is very deficient. Truthfully, we have found that a higher intellect and the application of high-quality intelligence are only present in such a valuable way in a minority of people. This is because the importance of forms and laws, or rather the structure of genuine logical thinking and its conclusions, can only be expressed correctly and comprehensively through a lively and alert mind and reason. However, as you say, this is not characteristic of the majority of humanity on Earth, but only of a very small minority who consciously strive to use their intellect and reason correctly, and who also turn to objects that can only be understood through intelligent, rational inquiry in order to arrive at truthful, valuable conclusions.
You speak of logic, as I understand your explanation and exposition.
Yes, that is the term commonly used in the English language, as I know. But this logic is only characteristic of a minority of Earth humans, and
only a minority, as you say, and as you have observed. I think, and I must come back to this, that only righteous people embody this minority and that Nazi-minded people, who are mainly power-hungry despots, tyrants, and dictators, do not belong to it, nor do those rulers who only think superficially. But the majority of humanity is also stuck in illogicality and intellectual weakness, so that only a minority remains that is connected to logic. But it is precisely this minority that is harmed and insulted in a very vulgar and nasty way, because, as a result of their interest, they turn their attention to things that cannot be grasped or understood intellectually and rationally by those who are weak in intelligence and equally weak in intellect. Consequently, those in the minority who are genuinely interested, who strive for understanding and reason in their thinking, and who get to the bottom of a matter, are treated with sheer stupidity, and, as a result of not thinking in ignorance, are idiotic reasoned and humiliated, disadvantaged and threatened or even physically harmed by stupid sayings and primitive expressions.
Exactly, that is also our observation. But now, Edward, I must return to my duties. If you have nothing else of importance.
No, no. Then go. Goodbye. I do not want to keep you from your duties.
Thank you, and goodbye.